Hey y'all, No here. Well, this week's lesson is on the subject of foot washing. Now, this is going to be the first in a series of lessons that will lead up to and through Palm Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, and then even a couple of lessons after Resurrection Sunday. So hopefully you've been looking ahead if this is not 2025 because this year Resurrection Sunday is coming much, much later in the year, actually in April, as opposed to, late March or early April in most years. So there's a series of lessons that will all line up with each other in chronological order, the events before, during, and after the crucifixion and resurrection. So hopefully you've been looking for those if it's not 2025. Now, in all four of the Gospels, all four Gospels give us information about what's commonly referred to as the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper or the Last Passover. But only John's Gospel includes the event of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And so, in this day of people barely even ever standing up, much less walking somewhere, much less walking in their bare feet, it may take a little bit of background information to your students for them to even make sense out of the reason why anybody would wash somebody else's feet. But of course, it was a much, much different age and culture in Israel at that time, or in the Middle East at that time, or really anywhere else in the world at that time. There were no cars. Some people had animals that they could ride to get to one place to another. But for the biggest part, people had to walk wherever they went. And only, the most wealthy of people would have anything even resembling shoes. And even at that time in history, it was more like sandals, not like shoes that we would think of in today's time. Now, there are some church bodies that actually have foot washing ceremonies, and I don't see any problem with that. It's a very beautiful picture that Christ gave us. But I would say this: if you are in your church are only having a ceremony and you're not practicing the full servanthood that Jesus demonstrated when he washed the disciples' feet, then I think you're missing out on a whole lot. And hopefully no churches are just doing that. Hopefully everyone understands, every believer in a church body, that we should take care of each other's needs and be available to help one another. So one way I used to kind of get this across to my students is I would ask them the question, if anyone walked to church this morning. And in my 21 years of teaching Sunday school, I never had any of my students say that they walked to church. And definitely I don't think any of them even rode to church and walked into church with no shoes on because they had no shoes. And so that kind of leads into the way things was back in Jesus' time, when they had, everyone practically had to walk wherever they went. And so whenever they got to the place that they were going, there was a very good reason why they actually needed for their feet to be washed. Their feet were dirty by the time they walked from one place to another. And so that was kind of a common courtesy of, if you were going to someone's house to visit or to have a meal, then a servant or even the person whose home you're going to would provide water and wash your feet for you. It was just a courtesy. That was really more than a courtesy, but it was something that was actually needed by the people that had to walk to the place that they were going. So that was part of why Jesus chose to wash the disciples' feet, was that unlike people today that have shoes and socks, their feet actually needed to be washed, and there was no one there. There were no servants there that they could get to wash the disciples' feet. So Jesus took it upon himself to wash his disciples' feet for them. And so, yes, what he did was to serve as an example for the disciples, but perhaps the reason that he chose to use that as an example was that it wasn't just an example, it was something that they needed. So the scripture that I use for this subject of foot washing is found in John chapter 13, and we're going to start with verse 3 and go through verse 5 to start with. And so it says, starting in John 13:3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, he rose from supper, and this is like the Passover meal that John is talking about here. So he rose from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself about. And then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wash them with the towel. And then we're going to drop on down to verse 12. And it says, so when he, that is Jesus, had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Now here's the most important part of the passage. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. So the example here is not so much that Jesus just washed their feet, but he demonstrated a principle that they were going to need to follow in years going forward. And that wasn't that they would have a ceremony when they gathered at church where they, ritually washed each other's feet, even though their feet weren't dirty. Now, at that time in history, their feet probably would have been dirty, and they may have actually followed this practice when they gathered together to worship or to pray together, because it was something that was needed. But going forward, as shoes and socks were invented, the need for washing people's feet after a journey kind of wasn't needed anymore. But the greater example that Jesus showed us was that each person should be a servant to another person. And, are there times when, even today, people's feet need to be washed by somebody else? Well, as weird as it might sound, possibly. For instance, there are people, because of disabilities and things like that, that can't wash their own feet. If there's a person who's paralyzed and can't use their arms or their legs, then they have to have someone else to wash their feet for them and give them, help them to bathe their whole body, for that matter. There are people who, for different reasons, can't cut their toenails. My mom got that way towards the end of her life. It was very hard for her to cut her toenails because she had bad eyesight and she had a bad back, and it was hard for her to reach down to her foot to cut her own toenails. So is that something that might be needed by someone? Absolutely. And if we know somebody that needs help in doing those things, we should be willing to do those things, even though they're not, that's one of the least pleasant ways you could serve someone else that I can think of. But if they need it, we should be willing to do it, or anything else that we can do to help someone else with something that they need. Now, today, or in your lesson for this week, there's not really going to be a craft. There's not going to be anything to make or anything like that. But what you're going to do, and I hope you have a teacher and an assistant teacher, because you really need two people in order to do what you're going to do. You're going to wash your students' feet. And we're going to do something very special that will require that their feet need to be washed. So let's pause right here and let me set everything up, and I'm going to show you what you are going to do for your students and the details of how you're actually going to wash your students' feet this week. So let's pause and I'll show you what you're going to do. Okay, so here's the way the foot washing is going to go. And be flexible. Just because I can do it here at my home, you may have to be creative in how you do it in your Sunday school classroom. But the gist of it is like this. So we're going to give our students a reason to need their feet washed, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use some liquid tempera paint and a paintbrush. And if you remember our lesson about the value of human life, if you remember in that lesson during the craft, we painted our students' hands with paint, and then they made their handprints. Well, today you're going to paint their feet, and they're going to make their footprints. So you're going to need a small chair here on this corner, and then a small chair probably right here on this end. So what we have here, I've got a piece of 2 foot by 3 feet long, what I call moving paper. And you can get this at like U-Haul stores and things like that. And all this paper is paper that you use to wrap, glasses or breakables during a move. but it comes out to be just about the right size to make some footprints on. So kind of starting at the beginning, okay, so you're going to put your first student in a chair right here that's going to be facing towards the opposite corner. Okay, so they're going to be sitting in this chair with their feet up off the floor. And so you're going to paint the bottoms of their feet. Don't use too much paint, okay? You want to use just enough to where they can take a couple of steps and make their footprints, but not so much that it's going to soak through the paper and get on the floor. So they're going to be sitting here with their feet sticking out this direction. You're going to paint their feet, and then they're going to put their feet on the paper like this. And then they're going to need for you to help them to stand up. So they'll need to hold on to your hands or something so that you can help them to stand up out of the chair. And then they're going to take like a step here, and then when they get over to this corner, the last step that they take is going to be to step into this tub with water in it, okay? So they're also going to need to hold on to your hand to be able to step into this tub without losing their balance. So be sure that you're here to hold their hand, and maybe somebody on each side to hold their hand till they step over in this tub of water. Once they're in the tub of water, then they can turn around or face whichever direction you need for them to face. And then what you're going to do is you're going to wash the paint off of their feet. Now that's the other reason that you don't want to get more paint on their feet than you need, because we want the water to not get so much paint in it from being washed off people's feet, that instead of washing it off their feet, that it actually paints their feet even more. So that's the reason for doing that. Now I have written on my piece of paper, Jesus said, "Follow me." And then what I always tell them when they stand up to walk is I'll say, "Now walk towards Jesus," which is always a good thing to do. But feel free, you could put Jesus said, I gave you an example, or Jesus said, wash one another, do this to one another, whatever you want to put on your sheet of paper. Okay, so once they walk over, sit in the pan, stand in the pan, you're going to have them sit in the chair while you wash their feet off. If you have some type of a bathtub mat or something that can keep the floor from getting so wet, that would help too. I used to use paper towels to wipe people's feet off with, to dry them, but I also used to take like a bathtub rug for them to stand up on. And you may even want to have another chair ready for people to use to put their shoes and socks back on. And obviously, once one gets finished here or gets close to being finished, depending on how many students you have, you could even be have your assistant paint somebody's feet while you're washing somebody's feet up here. At some point, switch places so the assistant gets the opportunity to wash the student's feet also, because it is, if you really think about that you are actually following the example that Jesus gave us, it's a very beautiful thing to do, to get down on your hands and knees like I am here to serve someone else. So I think I have covered everything today. If I left something out, don't be afraid to leave me a question. Hopefully, if this is not 2025, you have looked ahead and found the lessons for Resurrection Sunday. There will be several others following, and I'll do them in the chronological order that they happened in Scripture. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. God bless you, each and every one, and via con Dios.